professional journalism has become that which follows an establishment consensus. Not what the truth is, not what the truth, where the sources of the truth might be, but the word of the government. So my book, as I mentioned, is something I hope of an antidote to that. It discusses Iraq, it discusses Palestine, it discusses South Africa and what happened after Nelson Mandela was released and democracy came to that country, and it establishes another, quote, good, unquote, war, Afghanistan. So I hope at the very least it will contribute to a wider understanding of the kind of propaganda that we don't yet fully recognize as propaganda, though I have to say I've never known a time when readers, viewers and listeners have become more aware of the more obvious manipulations of what they are hearing and reading about in the media. All this has a certain urgency, because the one chapter that isn't in my book is Iran. And we are heading rapidly towards what will be a catastrophic attack on Iran in terms of the lives of people in that country, in terms of the exacerbation, if you like, of terrorism throughout the world, and for any kind of stability in the world. That's why the lessons that we should be reading about Iraq, about Palestine, about Afghanistan, should be telling us that we need to be doing something about the prospect of the next willful act of criminal mayhem. I'll stop there because I would like to hear your questions and we can discuss those topics further. Thank you.
Thank you very much to start with, for bringing the subject of the 650,000 dead Iraqis, which happen to be my own people, really. And for me, it's a very emotional subject. And I salute you for championing the causes of the Palestinians, the Iraqis, etc. Noam Chomsky recently said that the media generally says there is one superpower left, which is obviously the United States. But he says, don't let that fool you, because really there is another one, which is world public opinion. Mm-hmm. Now, what do you think of that to start with? And the second thing is, how do people like yourself, Robert Fisk, Noam Chomsky, the few really brilliant voices in this world, can help us to promote this? Because we as individuals, we find it very hard to try and see the light in this, really, because it's a desperate situation that we live in with this kind of octopus. I call it Darth Vader, which is the United States of America. So I'll leave that to you. Thanks.
Well, I agree with I agree that the other world power is public opinion. I've never known such a level of consciousness, such a level of public power, and a public sense of itself and public awareness. Now, I know that may not chime with people's experiences. You often hear people saying, well, you know, what can we do about it? There doesn't seem to be anything we can do about it. But large numbers of people are doing something about it. There's no doubt that a social justice campaign, which I suppose really inaugurated at the World Trade Organization meeting in Seattle in 1999, in spite of the massive propaganda and and imposition of American power that followed September the 11th, 2001. In spite of that, I think that movement has spread across the world and is probably the most informed, the most universal, the most understanding of issues that I've ever known. I mean, we often go back to the 1960s, and yes, 1960s and 1970s. There were great movements that represented public opinion. But I think the movement today is much better informed and has greater potential.
We accept the fact, at least I do, that we shouldn't be in Iraq. But the question is, how do we extricate ourselves from Iraq? How do we get out without leaving a terrible sort of civil war or whatever it is behind us, and over what sort of period? And maybe we shouldn't go down the downward path in terms of Iran as well. But again, what should our policies be to Iran? How do we actually do something positively? What next steps should we really take?
Thank you. Get out, troops out tomorrow. Out. I mean, this is terribly important. When you said should we do, what right do we have to be there? Forgive me, my tone is not directed at you, but when I say, who the hell are we? What right? When you say a civil war, it has produced a civil war. This is one of those famous cradles of civilization, Iraq, Mesopotamia. When I was in Iraq before the war, the sense that I got was not of people as Sunni or Shia. Yes, there were ethnic problems, but there was a great deal of intermarriage, and people were very proud to call themselves Iraqis. And what we have done in that country is, in the classic colonial manner, splinter them. And it's been the old story, we can't give the natives independence, we can't let them have that because they'll all fight each other when we leave because we're so fantastic. We may have killed 1 million people there or contributed to it or ignited a civil war. But think of what will happen if we leave. Well, when we leave, it will be rather more difficult to control the country. But the only thing I would add to that, if there's going to be any leaving, it's got to include the 14 fortress bases that the Americans have built up and down the country, which you almost never read about. Then they're hardly ever attacked, and they've been built to allow America to have to really control Iraq and allow its troops to get out, to satisfy the people at home. For some politician or president to say he ended the war while keeping an American presence in that country. What goes on outside those fortresses really won't bother them, as long as they have control of the resources of the country, long as they have control of the oil of the country, and as long as they have a huge base or number of bases in the middle of the Middle East. It's a colonialism of the mind. We've got to lose the we. The we doesn't exist. That existed when colonial governors wore plumes in their head and strutted around and so on. They don't belong in the 21st century.
Would you join me, please, in thanking John Pilger?